If you've been following my channel for a little while, you'll know that I'm a big CG destruction nerd. What I have to admit though is that I'm not a huge Marvel fan, but something that is undeniable is that Marvel has some of the best destruction visual effects in movie history. So in this video, I'm gonna try to recreate this Avengers base destruction scene from scratch using only free software available to anyone. First off, we need to create the actual 3D scene in which the destruction is gonna take place. In the original scene, the Avengers base is incredibly detailed and meticulously crafted, but I think we can get away with low poly buildings and spice it up with some texture detail later on. So I went to work blocking out the main recognizable buildings and then just duplicated this generic building where it wouldn't be noticed. To add some detail, I modeled these 5G tower looking pieces and scattered them throughout the scene. Then I just slapped on a concrete material and then mixed it with this generic sci-fi texture to give the illusion of detail. A large part of this scene is entirely covered by trees, so we need to find a way to render that convincingly and at a large scale. I brought in these high poly trees and gave them this geometry node setup, which switches between the high poly version and this low poly proxy mesh, depending on if we're rendering or if we're in a viewport. This allows us to visualize the placement of the trees in real time, and then when we render, we get this super dense forest effect that just looks great. To fake the look of the water, I simply brought in a huge flat plane and gave it this transparent material with a bunch of tiny bumps, basically giving the effect of smaller ripples on the water. This is a really effective way to make convincing water, especially when the light hits it at an angle like this and we get these nice reflections. At this point, the scene was looking pretty good, so I moved on to the main part of this project, which was the explosion simulation. To get the main shape of the explosion, I used these displaced spheres as emitter objects and then animated them to pop up one after another like this. I duplicated all of these spheres and turned them into these smoke trail emitter objects to get these nice trails that we see in the original. Then to convey the force of the pressure wave from these explosions, I created a third and final emitter type for each explosion that created these sort of ground shock waves of dust. At this point, I was really happy with the shape of the explosion, so I moved on to prepping for baking the actual simulation to a VDB file. And one really cool trick I've learned recently is that you can have different emitters in the same smoke simulation emit different colored smoke, which you can then use in the shading to separate between the dust and the smoke and basically have different colors that all interact in the same simulation. So I made the main emitter be red, the trails be green, and the shockwave be blue. Then after baking it all, I could use these color attributes to blend between different volumetric materials. And here you can clearly see how this adds a lot of life to the simulation compared to only using one color for all of it. If you want a more in-depth look at this method, by the time this video goes live, you'll be able to find a step-by-step tutorial covering this on my Patreon. I also want to say I greatly appreciate all of my long-term Patreon members. You are the backbone of this channel, and yeah, I can't thank you enough. To sell the power of the shockwave, I added these force fields that would displace the trees outwards like this. And I wish I would have made this a little bit slower so it was more visible in the final scene, but the effect is really solid. To bring it all together, I added some spark effects and some debris from the buildings, and then I just animated these missile trails using particle emitters and had the smoke fade out gradually using this shader setup. After rendering for about an hour, this was the final result. I definitely think it captures the essence of the scene, but one thing that's sort of lacking is that super high resolution detail in the smoke simulation. And while my simulation was quite big, it was about 16 gigabytes, I think I could have pushed it further to get some of that really high resolution detail that we see in the original. That's one thing that I would change, but overall I'm really happy with the result. Feel free to suggest any other movie scenes that you'd want me to recreate, and I'll see you in the next one.